Shrunken heads. What are these macabre curiosities? Where do they come from? How were they made? Now scientists are using advanced forensic technology and DNA analysis to find out who these people really were.
The DNA analysis has revealed that they were definitely from the same family, and they might have been brothers.
Anthropologists are discovering the science of head shrinking.
The ability to preserve a head for over 100 years is really quite incredible.
And putting their research into practice.
Right now, I'm actually removing the skin from the skull, because that's the first stage of head shrinking.
They're uncovering a dark tale of ancient ritual and Victorian obsession, exploration and exploitation, forgery and murder, to reveal the secrets of the shrunken heads. In the 19th century, a gruesome curiosity captured the public imagination and created an obsession for these exotic novelties. Decapitated human heads shrunk to a fraction of their original size.
Shrunken heads were sought after because they were really rare. They were really macabre. They were so far removed from our own culture, and therefore they were the height of the trophy in the oddity collection for a 19th century collector.
Shrunken heads have long been viewed as almost like freak show ornaments that would be put in displays or in even private collections for people to stare at, without anyone really acknowledging that this was once a living, breathing individual.
There are thousands of shrunken heads in museums around the world. Some on display, others locked away. And the shocking truth is, most of these are real human heads. Where did they come from? How were they made? And what's the true story behind this strange and disturbing phenomenon? Now scientists can finally answer these questions using DNA, forensic science, and advanced computer modeling. Among them is Dr. Tobias Holton, an anthropologist specializing in facial anatomy.
The intention of our forensic investigation is that we can actually discover the identity of the individual, that it's not just the so-called specimen that's hidden behind a glass cabinet, but actually a living, breathing person that once existed. Who are they? Where did they reside? And how did they land up as a shrunken head?
The story begins deep in the Amazon rainforest, and with a single tribe, the Shuar. The tribe's ancestral homeland lies amongst the tributaries of the Amazon River in the remote jungle of Ecuador. With a reputation as fearsome warriors, the Shuar were the only South American indigenous people never to have been conquered by the Span Empire. Over thousands of years, they mastered the macabre art of head shrinking before it was banned in the 1960s. The Shuar call these shrunken heads Sansa. Felipe Senkush is a former president of the Shuar Federation.
La Sansa para nosotros los Shuar, primero es identidad propio de nosotros los Shuar, que significaba triunfo, poder, orgullo.
These weren't trophies of war. They were more than simply symbolic. In a world in which the spirits of the dead were as real as the living, shrunken heads served an important practical purpose.
La práctica de hacer la Sansa era una manera de exigir seguridad a la familia. Ese era el beneficio que traía la Sansa.
It was not about the physical item. It filled purely a practical, spiritual function.
At Philadelphia's Mutter Museum, curator and forensic anthropologist Anna Dodi studied Sansa and the Shuar belief system.
The Shuar believe in spirits. They believed that the enemy, the spirit of their enemy, could still harm them even after death, and that they had to take preventative measures. So by taking the head of their enemy and by creating these very special sansas, they could actually effectively seal the spirit of their defeated enemy in the head.
Each genuine shrunken head shares the same distinctive characteristics: charcoal-darkened skin and sealed eyes and mouth. The careful and deliberate closure of the eyes and mouth provides a clue to the shrunken head's spiritual purpose.
The eyes can be sewn shut, the nose is sometimes plugged shut, and most importantly, it's the mouth. The mouth is either pegged shut with very specific types of pegs, or it's actually sewn shut. And that's very important because you want to seal these orifices up so that the soul or the spirit of the defeated enemy cannot escape.
The head was strung on a cord and worn by the man who'd taken it. The killer gradually absorbed the captured soul's power. When this was complete, the head was thrown away. Shrunken heads were sacred items, but not permanent ones.
The Shuar weren't really interested in the actual physical head. They were interested in the process, which involved trapping a vengeful soul and using that power to bring good fortune to themselves. And actually, the heads had a shelf life of 1 to 2 years, after which time the Shuar would typically throw the heads out.
But there are hundreds of shrunken heads in museums and collections around the world. So where did they come from? Are they genuine Shuar shrunken heads, or clever fakes? Medical historian Dr. Lindsay Fitzharris wants to discover their secrets.
A lot of people, when they visit a museum and they see a shrunken head, the first question they ask is, how was it made? But very few people ask, how did it get there in the first place?
Fitzharris believes that finding out how and why these people ended up in museums will take investigators a step closer to discovering their identity. She's traveled to the State Ethnological Museum in Warsaw, Poland, where the DNA of several shrunken heads has been analyzed. Magdalena Gujejko is the collection's curator. She's identified 2 heads that bear a striking similarity.
So the DNA analysis has revealed that they were from Ecuador. They were from the same tribe and most probably in the same family. They might have been fighting together with a common enemy and killed at the time.
Traditionally, the Shuar discarded shrunken heads after a year. But the fact that these 2 heads still here, 150 later, is a clue that around the middle of the 19th century, something stopped the Shuar from destroying heads and changed their world forever. Since the Spanish conquest of Ecuador in the 16th century, the Shuar had successfully repelled invaders. But in the 1840s, Western explorers and traders began to penetrate the Shuar's remote territory in search of the rubber trees that grew in the jungle. Here, they were captivated by the Shuar's shrunken heads, because these tiny human heads appealed to a gruesome Victorian mindset.
You have to remember that this is a very different culture from ours. This is a time of public executions, and this is a time when the criminal will be hanged and publicly dissected, and his skin will be used to bind a book about his crime. So the shrunken heads very much fit into that macabre trinkets that people were trying to get their hands on. The stranger, the weirder, the better for their collections.
From the mid-19th century onwards, the Shuar stopped discarding their heads and began to sell them to travelers and traders. This may have been the fate of the 2 warriors, made as genuine ceremonial shrunken heads, then sold on to traders. News of these gruesome curios began to spread across Europe and North America. Collectors, scientists, circus impresarios, and freak show entertainers all wanted a shrunken head.
People in the 19th century traveled all over the world at this time looking for strange and unusual objects for their curiosity cabinets.
By the 1850s, an ancient ritual had become an international trade. It was the beginning of a terrible new chapter in the long history of the schwa.
Eso, pero por provocación de los extranjeros que dicen, quiero chanza, te pago. Entonces, desde ahí hay un mercado que compra, una demanda, una oferta. Entonces, eso han motivado para que el schwa ahora ya no como en guerra, sino como todo un delincuente.
No longer simply selling discarded heads, the schwa began killing to supply the Western demand for shrunken heads. Their jungle homeland erupted into bloodshed. Nothing was sacred. Nobody was safe. Not even the dead. Shrunken heads. Macabre curiosities that were once living, breathing people. Now scientists are using forensic technology and DNA to reveal the secrets of these shrunken heads, whilst anthropologists are investigating the culture that made them. In Warsaw, Poland, medical historian Dr. Lindsay Fitzharris is investigating a collection of heads in the State Ethnological Museum. And one has captured her attention.
As you can see, the ear is a lot different. It doesn't have as many details as they have. It doesn't resemble as much as human ear.
This is not a human head. It's a clever fake, made of animal hide that was stretched and molded to appear human.
So we can be quite sure that it's made of an animal skin.
But the Schwa tribe were head shrinkers, not leather workers. So if they didn't make this head, who did? In the mid-19th century, the Amazon's rubber trees and mineral riches brought traders, miners, and missionaries to the region. Settlements sprung up in or near Schwa territory. The fake head suggests some of these colonial settlers wanted a piece of the lucrative trade in shrunken heads, making a fast buck selling fake heads to eager traders and explorers.
A lot of collectors were being duped and paying a lot of money for essentially what was a fake shrunken head at this time. And they were being sold, you know, incredible stories that were attached to these objects to go along with them.
Another head in the museum's collection came with exactly this kind of tall tale. Could this be another fake head?
The head was acquired by the museum in 1950. The information that they gave us was that it was a male shaman who was trying to cure a child of one of his tribesmen. But since he couldn't do it, the father of the child killed the shaman and took his head. That's what we thought during a very long time.
In 2016, the museum analyzed the head's DNA. The analysis revealed this was not made of animal skin. It was a real human head. But something was wrong.
The DNA analysis said that this is a female head, not a male.
It's a shocking revelation. Genuine ceremonial shrunken heads are always male. Because the Schwa shrank heads to stop the soul of a slain warrior from taking revenge. And in Schwa society, women were never warriors.
Shrunken heads were traditionally made of male warriors. Women, on the other hand, were not expected to present the same threat at all.
So the only reason to shrink a woman's head would be to satisfy the Victorian demand for morbid curios. She wasn't a victim of tribal conflict, but of cold-blooded murder.
The killing started to increase in order to supply for the demand. So it was most probably an innocent female.
This woman's death had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with money. This is a commercial shrunken head.
Commercial heads were created just for trade, just as a commodity. There was no spiritual aspect connected to it.
By the late 19th century, in the quest for ever stranger curiosities, human heads had become commodities. And the Shuar was central to this bloody trade, as victims and perpetrators.
Desde que el Shuar supo que la tzantza tiene valor, ya ahora se ha generado en las comunidades inseguridad, amenaza.
The Shuar prided themselves on their fearsome reputation. They fought amongst themselves, clan versus clan, and against neighboring tribes, using blowpipes and spears. But the Victorian fascination with shrunken heads turned these localized skirmishes into full-blown war. Because as the trade escalated in the late 19th century, instead of buying shrunken heads with cash, Europeans began trading with a deadly new currency: guns.
This allowed the Shuar people to collect heads at a greater pace and in greater number. And the Shuar began killing people indiscriminately in order to meet European demand.
The guns triggered an explosion in violence, as a vicious circle of supply and demand, blame and retaliation spiraled out of control.
So it does seem that the more we dig deep into the history of the head shrinking trade, it becomes more and more grim and macabre and unpleasant and removed from its original meaning.
Two genuine ceremonial shrunken heads, a fake made of animal skin, and the shrunken head of a woman made for commercial purposes. The four heads in Warsaw tell an increasingly disturbing story of a descent from ancient ritual to fakery and murder. But this is just the beginning. Now, anthropologist and facial anatomy expert Dr. Tobias Holton wants to delve deeper into the secrets of shrunken heads, to retrace their journey from Europe back to where the story began, the heart of South America and the Amazon basin. His destination? The historic colonial city of Cuenca in Ecuador. Here, on the edge of Shuar territory, he wants to discover the secrets of shrunken heads.
I want to get to understand the whole custom, the people behind it, as well as the victims of the head shrinking.
The city's museum is home to South America's largest collection of shrunken heads. Holton hopes these heads, so close to the Shuar homeland, will hold more clues about how they were made and who they were. But he's about to discover they're not what he expects. With specialist imaging technology used by crime scene investigators, he examines the heads in forensic detail. Infrared reflectology captures infrared wavelengths beyond the range of visible light to reveal details invisible to the naked eye.
The benefit of using this is that it will give me a nice defined image of the skin and give me a detailed idea of any changes in the skin pattern, which will help identify if this is a ceremonial Sansa or a commercial shrunken head.
It's the first time this technology has been used to examine the heads in the museum's collection, revealing to curator Tamara Landivar details she's never seen before. And almost immediately, Holton sees there's something strange about this shrunken head. There's no doubt it's human, but a genuine ceremonial shrunken head should have smooth, hairless skin, evidence that the head had been prepared using the traditional Shwa technique of ironing the skin with a heated rock. The images reveal the skin on this head is thicker and rougher than expected.
The individual that was processing this head didn't actually iron the skin in quite the same way as the Shwa.
This subtle detail, invisible to the naked eye, suggests this is not a genuine ceremonial shrunken head.
No, I think it's most probably a commercial shrunken head.
So if this head wasn't made by the Shwa, who did make it? By the 1880s, the Western mania for shrunken heads had triggered a twisted gold rush. And this treasure wasn't mined from the earth. It was made from human flesh. A single shrunken head could be exchanged for a gun or machete, or sold for between $5 and $25. Not much for a human life, but a small fortune in 19th century Ecuador. With serious money to be made, the Shwa began killing to meet Western demand. Tribal warriors became commercial headhunters. And it wasn't long before outsiders joined the deadly treasure hunt. In the towns and settlements on the edge of the jungle, colonial settlers soon learnt the ancient art of head shrinking.
Para nosotros, tanto el europeo como el shuar, que practica esto de hacer tzantzas, pero no tzantzas culturales, son repudiables para nosotros.
By the late 19th century, the Shwa and colonial settlers were all making shrunken heads to sell. But Halton's infrared images reveal even this wasn't enough to satisfy the insatiable demand for these gruesome collector's items. Because on the skin of another head in the museum's collection, he's discovered strange raised patches, evidence of an even darker chapter in the story of shrunken heads.
As you can see, this area here looks like that might be a lesion that had developed during decomposition.
After death, tissue begins to break down, causing skin to discolor and disintegrate. And that means this man wasn't killed in tribal warfare. He wasn't killed to fuel the trade in shrunken heads. He was already dead.
It looks like the time scale between the person's death when the head was taken and then shrunk, is probably a larger time scale than what you'd expect to see with a ceremonial censer.
The Shwa shrunk their victims' heads immediately after death to prevent their vengeful spirit from escaping. But this head had started to decompose.
The heads could have been allowed to decompose over a period of time.
It can mean only one thing.
This head was stolen from a body and shrunk for commercial purposes.
By the late 19th century, it seems a new kind of criminal had joined the feeding frenzy. Body snatchers. But where did they snatch the bodies from? Halton thinks one head in the museum's collection holds a clue.
This is an interesting one. The wavy hair and the thick beard, the full exposure of the upper eyelids, eyelashes, the very fine suturing, is probably produced from a European individual.
This man was of European origin. Shockingly, it's not a unique discovery. Investigations into other collections across the globe have revealed similar, unsettling results.
Reasonably certain that this one is a non-ceremonial shrunken head. It is made predominantly for the tourist trade.
The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia has been carrying out a survey of shrunken heads held in collections across the United States. They've discovered that even genuine fake ceremonial heads from South America are not always what they seem.
You can see the hair is shorter. If you look very closely, he's got a mustache. His hair is lighter in color. And also, the hair is falling out. This was made with a different technique than what the Shwar would have used. We think it's actually of a person of Western origin.
The Western heads discovered in Philadelphia and Ecuador reveal Europeans living in South America were not immune from the trade fueled by their fellow Victorians. Living in or near Shuar territory in the late 19th or early 20th century, these men may have been missionaries or traders. And that made them an ideal target for body snatchers.
European heads would have likely been used because they were readily accessible within hospital mortuaries or in cemeteries, so they were easy to access by those living in colonial towns and villages, unlike the Shuar who were living out in the Amazon rainforest. A number of Europeans were actually purchasing heads that they thought were from the exotic Shuar culture deep in the Amazon, only to actually be holding on to a head that was actually shrunk of a European.
The investigation is uncovering a sinister story of headhunting and body snatching. But just when Holton thought he'd seen it all, there's worse to come. The collection of shrunken heads in the Cuenca Museum in Ecuador has revealed many unsettling secrets. But in the vaults, kept well away from public view, is a truly disturbing item that marks a terrible tipping point, as the demand for shrunken heads drove people to commit ever more desperate acts. It's the head of a child.
This is actually a rather shocking shrunken head look at.
Un dato de que más o menos tenía unos 6 años de edad aproximadamente.
To satisfy collectors' appetites for ever more, ever stranger shrunken heads, this child was decapitated and turned into a commodity.
It's really an absolute travesty that a child should be used this way to earn money and profits. It's really quite disgraceful that somebody should do this to a child.
The fakes, the innocent men and women, even the dead, weren't enough to satisfy the Western appetite for these macabre collector's items. And so the headhunters broke the final taboo. They began killing children.
When headhunting became particularly popular, especially referring to the 1880s, women, children, absolutely everyone would be killed in order to procure a sufficient number of heads to shrink, to sell in the markets.
This indiscriminate slaughter was a world away from the original purpose of head shrinking, to prevent a warrior's soul from taking revenge on the killer.
Para nosotros es muy indignante. Es muy indignante que por dinero del extranjero hayan muerto niños y niñas, sobre todo lo que nos disgusta, nos ofende.
For the Shuar, as victims and perpetrators, the consequences of this twisted trade were catastrophic. The proud Shuar tribe, the only indigenous South American people to remain unconquered by the Spanish conquistadors, was pushed to the brink of extinction.
En las venganzas no había límite. Si mataban uno y si encontraban otros, igual le mataban, así sean menores, los mataban. Entonces, las familias, había peligro que los Shuar nos acabemos solos.
But as extinction loomed, attitudes began to change. Because not all the Westerners who ventured into the jungle came in search of shrunken heads. Some came to stop the bloodshed. Christian missionaries preached an end to violence and headhunting.
Y de ahí viene eso de no hacer guerra, no matar a nadie, peor hacer chanza. Eso es la influencia de los misioneros.
Gradually, Victorian obsession turned to modern repulsion. From the 1930s onwards, the trade in shrunken heads declined, until it was eventually banned by the Ecuadorian government in the 1960s. But those who didn't lose their lives lost their reputation.
Desgraciadamente se estereotiparon. A la cultura shuar se le conocía como salvaje, caníbales.
Now, Dr. Tobias Holton wants to set the record straight, to help restore the Shuar's reputation as a proud, ancient people, by reassessing the science of head shrinking.
Yes, it was a product of warfare, and warfare is never a positive thing. But the science that went behind the head shrinking practice was quite astonishing, and the ability to preserve a head for over 100 years within an Amazon rainforest condition is really quite incredible.
How did the Shuar shrink a human head to a fraction of its original size? And how have the heads that were made to be discarded after just a year survived for over 100? To find out, Holton needs to understand exactly what happens when a head is shrunk. And to do that, he must learn the ancient craft of head shrinking. For Holton, it will be the culmination of a decades-long fascination with this gruesome but frequently misunderstood custom.
My earliest experience of witnessing a shrunken head must have been when I was in school age, near enough 9, 10 years old. And I remember walking into a museum and seeing this specimen on display. And immediately, questions were ringing in my head. Who produced these incredible specimens? How did they do it? Why did they do it?
More recently, Holton has been captivated by one head above all others. The shrunken head of a man given to the McManus Museum in Dundee, Scotland in 1923. Now Holton hopes to learn the ancient art of head shrinking and use his findings in a unique experiment. He wants to discover the effects of the shrinking process. Then, with this information, he will attempt to reverse engineer the process that turned this man into a shrunken head, to create a computer-generated reconstruction of the man's face as he looked in life.
I want to go ahead and reconstruct a shrunken head to its original full human form. And this is essentially to raise the dignity of that individual and remind everyone that this was actually a human being.
The trade in heads was banned over half a century ago, but the physical process of making a ceremonial head has been handed down by word of mouth to today's tribal elders. This is the information Holton needs to undertake his ambitious facial reconstruction.
It's critical to actually identify how the head shrinks over this process so that I actually know when it comes to performing a reconstruction on a head, what features change the most and why.
Shuar tribal elder Nawak Ensa Kayap Pedro is one of the few people alive today who know how to make a ceremonial sansa. For Holton, this meeting is a unique opportunity to discover the secrets of the sansa at first hand.
Sansan nahanay niya ka, tuki ka nahanu ka pahuchuar me, au ka nishmam, supike kim, nishay ka sang yapahmek supiar me.
The original purpose of the sansa was to break the cycle of violence between rival clans and tribes. The Shuar believed possessing their victim's head would prevent him from returning to seek revenge.
Supikar, hukier ikar su, sukurar, namberan hanawar, amuar me.
Nawek shares his ancient knowledge, providing a blow-by-blow account of how to shrink a human head. As Holton listens, Nawek explains the process in detail. How to remove the skull, eyes and tongue. How to treat the skin, and how to dry it out. And throughout the entire process, the killer fasted to protect himself against his victim's malign influence. Once the head was shrunk, the warrior regained his power by drinking an hallucinogenic potion.
Herman Jinja, we army, we yay, Tonanam. Tonana we, my choma, attack Shaka Karman.
This unique insight reveals the ritual and technical complexity of making a genuine ceremonial shrunken head.
To actually preserve a human head within a hot and humid environment is something that doesn't come naturally. So the intelligence and sophistication that they had to practice in order to mummify these heads is quite astonishing.
Holton's trip to Ecuador has given him step-by-step instructions on how to shrink a head. Now he must put his knowledge into practice. His goal? To create a shrunken head. With smooth, relatively hairless skin, a pig's head provides the closest analogy to a human head.
So I'm just taking dimensions across the face, and this will act as a means of comparison following head shrinking to get a general idea of how much the head's reduced.
Using the techniques learned in Ecuador, Holton begins the gruesome process. First, he removes the one thing that won't shrink, the skull.
What most people don't realize is that the Shuar had to remove the skull in order to make shrinkage possible. So that's the reason for removing the skin from the head. This is pretty much what the Shuar would have done when shrinking a head.
Next, 3 wooden pins seal the mouth shut.
Amongst the Shuar, it was essential that the mouth was well and truly fastened because that was believed to be the central orifice that the enemy spirits would escape from.
He uses thick twine to sew the eyes shut.
So the significance of stitching the eyelids shut was that it was a means of trapping the enemy spirits within the head.
With the mouth and eyes sealed, Holton places the head into boiling water and leaves it for an hour. Like human skin, the pig skin is made up of collagen fibers, and when these fibers are exposed to temperatures above 145 degrees, they contract, causing the skin to shrink. To dry the skin and shrink the head even further, Holton fills it with hot pebbles and sand. This absorbs any remaining moisture. Finally, he irons the skin.
This is essentially the final touches of the head shrinking process. What I'm doing is taking a hot, flat pebble and ironing the outer face with it. And what this is doing is helping me mold the skin and dry it out entirely from the outside.
By the end of the process, the pig's head has shrunk by 1/3. Now he's seen firsthand how the shrinking process changes a head, Holton can embark on the final part of his quest.
The next stage is to take all the information that I've got so far and actually go through the process of reconstructing the face of a shrunken head to revive the warrior that once existed.
Using cutting-edge computer modeling technology, Holton will attempt something that's never been done before, to reverse the head shrinking process and discover the man behind the shrunken head. On a mission to reveal the secrets of shrunken heads, facial anatomy expert Dr. Tobias Holton has discovered how to shrink a head. Now he's ready to reverse it and reveal how one victim would have looked in life.
It's not going to right the wrongs of the past, but at least we're bringing back the human being from what is essentially looked upon as a museum artifact or a cultural specimen.
Holton has travelled to Liverpool John Moores University in the UK. Here, at the renowned Face Lab, facial reconstruction expert Professor Caroline Wilkinson has given a face to thousands of John and Jane Does. and help solve hundreds of murders and archaeological mysteries. But this could be her toughest case yet.
Usually, with the facial reconstruction process, what we're doing is we're looking at the structure of the skull and the details of the bones of the skull to tell us about the soft tissue features.
But shrunken heads have no skulls. The skull is removed to allow the head to shrink.
In this case, since we don't have a skull, we're going to use a template skull, which is a typical skull from that part of the world of a similar age and gender to our target individual.
Using a template skull is standard practice in forensic and archaeological facial reconstructions, where part of the skull is missing or badly damaged. It won't provide a perfect likeness, but it's the best solution with the available evidence.
We can use that template to unfold and inflate that shrunken head so that we can build the facial features and slowly build up the facial appearance of the individual.
Holton's analysis has established shrunken heads are, on average, a fifth of their original size. So to reverse the process, the head must be scaled up to 5 times its current size.
Need a bit of growth on the cranium, don't you?
Yeah.
The nose and mouth require careful attention. The mouth has become distorted by being pinned shut. And without a skull to hold it in place, the nose has retracted upwards as it shrunk. To correct these exaggerations, Holton turns to early photographs of Shuar tribesmen as a reference point.
If we push the mouth back in, and then this is pretty much there around the top.
Holton uses tissue depth markers based on data from average indigenous South Americans to digitally reinstate the tissue, fat, and muscle destroyed during the shrinking process, and give the face back its shape. With the facial structure in place, skin texture and typical Shuar body ornamentation can be added. Bamboo tubes decorated with red and yellow toucan feathers pierce the ears.
We can use cutting-edge CGI techniques for adding the skin and the hair and the other realistic details of the face.
Finally, the program renders the fine details, and the process is complete. At least 100 years after his death, 5,000 miles from his birthplace, a Shuar warrior stares out from the screen.
Is this the face you expected?
Well, it certainly looks like a Shuar warrior.
It does.
So, yeah,
It looks amazing.
impressive. Yeah.
From Amazonian warrior to Victorian collector's item and back.
Quizá no podemos volver a reparar el daño hecho, pero yo sí considero que podemos dignificar a la cultura Shuar, dándoles el lugar que ellos tuvieron como una cultura ancestral, con su cosmovisión, con su cosmovivencia.
The more we can learn about their traditions and their way of life helps us to better understand them.
They're more than just head shrinkers. That's one very small element of their identity. You know, they're botanists, they're horticulturalists, they understand their environments. They know how to survive in the Amazon rainforest.
En este momento, hacer zanza es delito. Ya no vemos como rito, ya no es sagrado, ya no es de cultura. Eso es penado por las leyes ecuatorianas. Nosotros hoy queremos vivir ya no en guerra, queremos crecer como guerra. No en guerra, en paz.
The story of shrunken heads and of this man is more than the story of macabre museum pieces. It's the story of a society, of victims who were also perpetrators, of exploitation, devastation, and survival.
Next tonight, Jack the Ripper, the missing evidence. And next week, Bettany Hughes crosses the Rubicon as she continues to take on the Roman Empire, new 8 Days That Made Rome returns next Friday night at 9.